The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Good morning and welcome to this new webinar hosted and created by the Research Foundation Flanders, better known as FWO. I'm Hans Willems, Secretary General of the Research Foundation, and together with three of my colleagues, Dirk, Inge and Steven, we will guide you through the evaluation and selection procedure of the PhD Fellowships Strategic Basic Research. So welcome, and before we start, maybe some practical detail that I can share with you. This is an interactive webinar, so you can ask us questions in real time by making use of the question tab that you can find on the right hand of your screen. Also be sure that this webinar is recorded, and afterwards you can consult it on our website. But right now you can also consult the PowerPoint that we will make use of during this webinar in the handouts section of GoToWebinar. Afterwards, of course, also on our website, you can find the PowerPoint as will be used today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to ask them. We will do our best to tackle as many questions as possible during the webinar, but be sure that afterwards we will also provide an answer to some questions maybe that we could answer during this live broadcast. This being said, I think we are ready to take off. And the main target group of this webinar are the new and current expert panel members for the PhD Fellowship Strategic Basic Research. As been said, we will guide you through the evaluation and the selection process of our evaluation procedure, and more particularly we will focus on the specific task that you have as a panel member. We will focus on the scoring approach, the interviews, the feedback. In short, every step of the evaluation procedure we will go into detail and guide you with some tips and tricks through the process as a whole. Of course, more details about the program, about FWO as a council, you can find on our website and the dedicated web pages. Before we start, and I'm afraid that almost every webinar that is hosted in 2021 will include some slides like this one. Of course, the COVID-19 crisis also hit hard in Belgium, and many of our candidates have seen an impact on their daily lives, but also on their research careers and their development. There was restricted access for research facilities, an increased commitment to teaching or healthcare in the private sector, but also, of course, a standstill in international mobility. All these are, in a normal situation, in normal years, very important aspects within the evaluation process. We have invited our candidates to mention throughout the different fields that we have asked them in the application form to mention possible influence on the quality of the fellowship application. And in the section career breaks, in the personal statement, in the mobility section, in the project description, in short, everywhere they think it's suitable, they can include some additional information about possible impact about COVID-19. As a panel member, we would like to ask you to take that into account in your assessment. These are strange and particular times for you as an evaluator, but of course also for our candidates and our applicants. So in that, it's obvious that we need to take that into account during the assessment and during the evaluation. Of course, COVID-19 will also have an influence on the practical details of the panel meetings. The pre-selection meetings, there will be an online meeting, that's for sure, but most probably also the meetings in September, scheduled in September, where we will organize the different interviews, will be in an online format. So before we start with the actual evaluation process, and my colleagues will guide you to each of the different steps, I would like to give you some contextualization about FWO as a research foundation, as a research and council and agency. The main mission of FWO, and we were established in 1928, so for many years now, the main mission is the funding of fundamental and strategic research. In order to do so, we offer a wide range of funding programs, funding schemes aiming on individual researchers, but also on research teams, of course, And FWO is ook the agency responsible for research infrastructure. And last but not least, maybe, we also are awarding scientific prizes and awards. The way we do things at FWO is almost every time based on a bottom-up principle. So that means that researchers can come to us with new innovative ideas, with research proposals, and we are responsible, and we in this case are you as an expert, and we in the administration are responsible for the scientific evaluation. Across all disciplines, we don't point out specific themes or topics. The evaluation is based on scientific excellence, that's obvious, and it's also an inter-university competition between the Flemish universities, and of course, really international when it comes to the applicants and the candidates. So it's a hard and harsh competition, but we do things very on a transparent and equal opportunities. But I think that most councils are going for that approach. Last slide as an introduction. This is an infographic, gives you some key numbers and data about the Research Foundation. You can see that the annual budget that we are working with is for this year 480 million euros, so that's quite substantial, and that actually makes us one of the larger players in Flanders and in Belgium when it comes to the funding of scientific research. The distribution among the different pillars within our council, you can see on the graph below, 75%, almost 75% is going to fundamental research, but also the strategic basic research is an important pillar within FWO with 16% of the available budget. For the moment, FWO funds directly and indirectly more than 4,000 researchers through fellowships, but also appointed on a specific research project. And also there, that's one of the biggest players or the bigger players in Belgium. Internationalization is an important aspect, and you can see the results there. More than 21%, more than 20% of our pre-doctoral researchers are coming from abroad. On a postdoctoral level, that's even 40%. Flanders is a small region, of course, so it's really important for us to attract talent and to reach out to researchers from abroad and offer them opportunities to perform research at Flemish universities. An important aspect, of course, is also the selection rate that we can offer. These are the results for last year, and you can see that for the pre-doctoral fellowship strategic basic research, we had a success rate of 35%. Unfortunately, based on the huge number of applications that we have received for this call, the call 2021, this selection rate will drop slightly below 30%, 29.8%, something like that. So slightly below 30%, but in short, 1 out of 3 applicants will receive the grant in the end. So that was all that I had prepared as an introduction to this webinar, and I'm glad to give the floor now to my colleague Stephen, who will guide you and give you some extra information about the PhD fellowship programs.
So thank you, Hans. So indeed, dear panel members, you're expected to award some PhD fellowships, so the Aspirant Fellowship, so the Research Foundation Flanders. A fellowship itself, it lasts for 4 years in total. The applicants, after 2 years, they have to apply for a renewal of their fellowship. Please keep in mind that we will select young researchers, so the applicants themselves, they should have obtained their master's less than 3 years at the application date of March the 1st, and may not have more than 18 months of scientific seniority by March the 1st of 21. They have to carry out a PhD project at a Flemish university under the supervision of a promoter, of course, but optionally they can also do part of their research in collaboration with another hosting institution, a strategic research center, or a non-Flemish research center. Important to keep in mind is that at FWO we do have 2 parallel funding schemes for PhD fellows. Both of them are oriented towards basic research projects, but the fundamental research call is just pure blue sky research, while for this call, the strategic basic research, program. Also, the application potential is an important aspect in the selection procedure, of course. So next slide, please, Hans. So actually, within the funding scheme, there are three crucial elements. We want to select strategically thinking and innovation-oriented scientists. So the candidate aspect is a crucial aspect within the selection procedure. So you should try to probe the candidates during the interview on this aspect, whether they have insight within their project, whether they do have insight in the application potential, etc. But my colleagues will come back to that later on within this webinar. But of course, the applicants should also come up with a challenging research proposal. So the proposals themselves, they should have a clear contribution to the international state of the art. And what's different from this funding scheme from the pure fundamental research scheme is, of course, that it's research which has a goal. So the application potential is quite important. So of course, on the mid to long term, in case of scientific success, the project might lead to innovative applications, so new products, processes, and services, etc. And the applicants themselves, they have to elaborate within their proposal on the potential economic added value of their proposal. They have to indicate which specific companies or sectors can eventually benefit from the research project. The research itself, it can also be, they have in line with some economic transition priorities, which are of course crucial in these times: health, resources, energy, etc. This is also, the applicants have to indicate that within their proposal. In total, within these funding schemes, we do have 24 expert panels. Each of the panels, they consist of a maximum of 12 members. And from the FWO side, we will moderate the selection process during the pre-selection phase and the interview sessions. More than half of the members are experts. They are affiliated at a non-Flemish research center or a business sector. So as the application potential itself is an important aspect in the evaluation procedure, more than a third of the experts, they're active within the research and development within an industrial sector. It's also important to mention that the applicants themselves, they have to choose the panel that fits best their project proposal. We give it to applicants the message that they have to choose the panel based on the research methodology, so not the application field. In case you should have any doubt whether an application is fitting towards that specific panel, we can also discuss during the evaluation procedure if there's a panel consensus to decide that the application is out of scope, and then the application can be rejected. So we will go over briefly to the evaluation and selection process. We will give a very short overview of the process. We will go a little more into detail in the evaluation criteria, how the selection of the candidates is done, and your role in the panel. And we also give some ideas about the timeline of this call. So actually, within the evaluation of the PhD fellowships, we will use a two-phase selection procedure. In the first phase, each of the applications is assessed by 3 different panel members. Each of the panel members have to draft up a short evaluation report. And based on these reports, we will meet in an online panel meeting to establish a preliminary ranking. And there we can decide which candidates can proceed to the second phase of the evaluation process, the interview phase. So for some candidates, the evaluation process ends somewhere in May. Their application will be rejected, and then we do have in September a second phase where you will actually have the opportunity to meet the candidates, probably virtual this year, and have an interview with them, and then try to probe their insights in their project, their view on the application potential, and so on, and then decide who will eventually get the grant. That's very briefly the evaluation process, and now my colleagues will go a little more into detail in the evaluation criteria.
Yes, thank you, Steven. For the assessment of the proposals, we are making use of 3 evaluation criteria: the candidate, the actual project, and the application potential with economic added value. Now, the candidate has the largest weight. We're counting that criterion for 60% of the total scoring. We're also looking at the candidate in a slightly different way in both phases. In phase 1, the pre-selection, we are assessing the study results as well as the relevant competences and any evidence of that. About the study results, so we're looking at the academic education record, where one of the reference factors is the positioning in their study group by means of a percentile. But any other evidence that the candidate can bring that he or she could distinguish herself by achievements as a student is important to take into account. Also, we ask the candidates in their file, in their application, to talk about the skills and the expertise they have already acquired and that are still under development. Some candidates may have already started their PhD research, and then it's also important to learn from them what they have already achieved in their early career. In phase 2, the interviews, we're looking at the full picture of the candidate. We're looking, is this really a good potential independent researcher, as well as does the candidate has enough potential as a strategically thinking and innovation-oriented researcher. So in the interview, we are assessing knowledge and insight, but also reasoning skills and a critical mindset. But also for SB, we are looking at insight of the candidate in strategic importance of the project that is presented, the positioning, the economic landscape, notions of that, IPR innovations, and so on. About the project sub-criteria, they are quite classical for a research project. Look, it's a PhD project, should be on that level, of course. And on the application potential, we assess whether the research approach is in line, is focusing on potential applications on the mid or long term. And also we are looking if the project would be successful, what would be economically relevant innovations that come out of it. Both project and application potential count for each 20% of the total score. Now we are striving at uniform evaluation over all the panels, and therefore we make use of a so-called scoring grid. So a number of scores, a scale from 0 to 7, and a number of scoring descriptors that help you assess to attribute a score. So it's important to you as a panel member that you get acquainted with the whole range of scores and descriptors that are mentioned for the different criteria, the different score grids. So check these criteria before really assign a score for a sub-criterion, and then you can still fine-tune. Mind that the benchmark is not the applications in your panel or even the applications that you are looking more closely at, but the international standard for PhD students. Also important to know, the score of 4 is good, is acceptable for funding, is a candidate, a proposal, is application potential with no real flaws. 7, however, is reserved for the absolute top 5% of the candidates and should be exceptional, should really be a candidate where you would be eager to hire him or her yourself. Something on the selection process. So this year we have 195 fellowships available. 90% of them we reserve to the different panels. They are proportionally distributed over the 24 panels, and we call this the panel quota. So 175 of the available fellowships. And in the first phase, so in this example on the scheme, the quota is 3, so the panel can directly assign up to 3 fellowships to the best candidates of this panel. This means in the first step we will pre-select 6 candidates, and we will reject the other applications. So the 6 best candidates will be invited to the interview. And then at the interview, the panel can decide the best ranked candidates, but also coming over a certain threshold value for the scores, will be directly attributed a fellowship. There also will be other good candidates, and the best remaining candidates will at the end, after all panels have taken place, be ranked over all panels as a kind of wild cards. And this will allow FWO to assign the remaining 10% of the fellowships, so 20 fellowships this year, and also make up a reserve list in case some assigned fellows withdraw after all. Then I give the word to Inge to talk about the roles and the task in the panel for you as a panel member.
So thank you, Dirk. So this brings you directly to you and your role and tasks as a panel member. So as already said, each of the 24 SB panels has on average 12 members. And as you are aware of, your major task is the evaluation of the PhD applications. So for this, FWO assigns each application to 3 panel members or internal reviewers and invites you to submit an evaluation report using the template and the scoring grid provided by us. In addition to writing the evaluation report, you are also responsible for writing the feedback. This is the role of one of the 3 internal evaluators, who is appointed at the start of the evaluation procedure as what we call the rapporteur. So you will know from the start for which applications you have to write the feedback. We will have 2 panel meetings. The first one is the pre-selection meeting, which, independent of any pandemics, is always online. And then we have the second meeting, which is the interview session meeting or the interview selection, which normally takes place here with us in the FWO buildings here in Brussels, but which also this year will most probably take place online, so next September. Another task of the panel consists of the evaluation of the midterm or final activity reports of the ongoing or recently finished SB fellows, for which actually the SB moderator takes the lead in this part. So this brings us to the next slide and to the role of the SB moderator. The SB moderator is part of the FWO staff and usually has several panels under his or her guidance and might have some scientific background in the scientific domain of the panel. On the one hand, the SB moderator provides procedural guidance regarding the conflict of interest rules and other FWO regulations, and also keeps an eye on the scoring, which should follow the criteria as outlined in the scoring grid. The SB moderator also provides some scientific guidance in, for instance, assigning the applications to the panel members according to their respective expertise. And once your report's submitted, the SB moderator prepares and chairs the pre-selection and interview meeting, and thus also a final proofreading of all the feedback reports at the end of the process. So on the next slide, we give you an overview of the timeline, the 2021 timeline. So from March 1, which was the deadline for submitting the applications, until last week, we had the eligibility check. And now at this stage, you all must have received the invitation to fill in your familiarity with the topic, as well as the possible occurrences of conflicts of interest for each application. So once you have filled this in, we will distribute the applications among all panel members so that you can start with the writing of the evaluation reports. Then the last 2 weeks of May to early June we will have the pre-selection meeting, and only after summer in September, we have the interview session, followed also by the editing of the feedback reports. We have already communicated to you the dates of the interview meetings in September, but we will inform you somewhere next week whether these will be spread over a 1 or 2 day session, as this depends on the number of applications in your panel. So now, as a small intermezzo, we would like to draw your attention to a short clip from our colleagues of the Royal Society on Unconscious Bias. Please have a look. So thank you. We're trying to get the slides back online by now. Okay, here we are. So now we are getting to the third part. If you can put on the next slide, please. Yes, we are getting to the third part of this webinar, during which we will explain the full evaluation process in 10 steps, going from the preparation phase to the pre-selection and then to the interview selection. So, well. Next slide, please. Yes.
So, of course, all reports themselves have to be provided via the FWO e-portal. So this is actually your gateway to communicate with us. The e-portal itself, it's available from our website, fwo.be. Most of you will already have received a login to log into our e-portal system. Actually, the layout itself has been changed since previous calls. When you log in, you will see you can either consult your tasks via the dashboard or at the left-hand side. Click on panel member, on the panel member button. Here you can consult all applications submitted within your panel. Also consult those applications for which you have to provide a pre-report. But first step in the procedure is to provide your confidence levels and potential conflict of interest for the applications within the panel. So next slide, please. So within a short time frame, we will ask you to provide us your confidence rates and potential conflicts of interest for each of the applications within the panel. Should you be affiliated to a Flemish research center, you can indicate that within the portal. Then there some fields will already be pre-filled. And for each of the applications, we would like to ask you your confidence rate. Should you be an expert to a certain topic, then your confidence rate is a 5. If you have no knowledge for a certain application at all, then your confidence rate will be 1. Of course, it's quite important to mention that, of course, we do have established a code of conduct for panel members. Of course, you're here as independent experts, and for instance, not, of course, a representative for a certain host organization. And should you doubt whether you are able to evaluate a certain application, please contact us. Of course, also, should you be approached during the evaluation process by, for instance, an applicant or a promoter, always refer to FWO and please notify us. And then after after the full overview of confidence levels and potential conflicts of interest has been obtained, we will assign all the applications to you as panel members. As already been said a few times, for each application, 3 panel members will act as internal reviewer, and 1 of you will be responsible to provide the feedback also to the candidates. For that, the FWO representative will take into account the confidence rate for each of the applications and, of course, potential conflicts of interest. Of course, this is a complex exercise. Please keep in mind that for certain applications, there might be some not 3 panel members who are real experts on a certain topic. So please keep in mind that for a certain application, you might also be a little further away from your field of expertise, of course. After that has been done, you will receive an email, an automatically generated email, together with some guidelines to evaluate the applications. Should, for instance, be, let's say, for instance, a hidden conflict of interest, you can receive the assignment within our e-portal, but please do notify us as soon as possible in that case, so we can try to find a solution and allocate that application to another panel member. The internal evaluation reports themselves, they're used to establish a provisional ranking for the pre-selection meeting. Of course, in order to prepare that meeting decently, we would like to ask you, of course, to respect the submission deadline. For the internal evaluation report, of course, it's quite important to take the application next to the scoring grids in order to attribute your scores. And your report, together with 2 reports from your colleagues, will serve as an input to establish a preliminary ranking. The average scores for each of the criteria, the candidate, the project, and the application potential will serve as a starting value for the panel meeting. We would like to ask you, of course, to be, let's say, a little concise in your pre-reports, but also try to add some value. So please do not copy paste some descriptors from the scoring grid or entire parts of the project proposal, but please do substantiate your appreciation, your strengths, your weaknesses for a certain aspect, and try to give scores which do match the scoring grid. As already been said by my colleagues, there are three aspects which are important within the evaluation of the candidates. It's the candidate, the project, and the application potential. And for the three aspects, there are actually two sub-criteria which have to be evaluated and scored. And then the average score serves as an input to establish the preliminary ranking. So now I would like to give the words to my colleague Dirk.
Yeah, okay, as an internal evaluator of an application, you will need to assess and to score 3 times 2 sub-criteria. In order to avoid a little bit an inflation of scores and a lot of 6 and 7s and so-called extremely very good candidates, we ask you to take into account the following. So how to assign the scores for each sub-criterion is to see, for instance, to start with the score 4 and see in the description box whether the 2 items or that several items are met or not met. If they are met, you can start with scoring a 4 and further go maybe towards a 5. And if also the items in the box for 6 and 7 are met, you can consider giving a score of 6 and 7. If the items that are in the 4 or 5 box are not met, however, you should start scoring 3 and even lower. So try to be a fair but also a severe evaluator. Note that the 4 is really the threshold for an application potential candidate being worth funding in FWO speak. Some more details on the different criteria and some more explanation. So in the pre-selection phase, we are looking at the study results and motivation and relevant competences. So about the academic education records, so the Flemish, the people, the candidates that obtained a degree at a Flemish university, they were able to get the percentile, so a statistical value of their position within their study group. Some are still in their last master year, so we'll offer you their bachelor results. Some will already be able to provide you with master results. So take that into account. Also take into account that the percentile for small study groups is statistically not worth very much, and that many non-Flemish universities do not provide percentiles or any ranking data. We ask the candidates, however, to provide all the evidence they have on where they could distinguish themselves during their academic study career. Also important is to look and to check all documents concerning skills and expertise, can also be scores of specific courses, also their start of their potential PhD career. Some of them I have already up to 18 months research experience. Also there, we're not merely looking at the publication list, but also, for instance, contacts they had, internship they had within a company or so, also very important for building up their profile as a potential PhD and SB PhD student. For the project, be aware that we're talking about a standalone 4-year PhD project, so it should be feasible to be carried out successfully by the candidate on herself, on himself. Also important here, even if the candidate has already started the PhD with another contract, it's important that they propose to FWO a 4-year PhD project, with, of course, as input the preliminary results they have already obtained during the pre-phase of the FWO fellowship. About the application potential, it's important we are talking here about economic added value. So in principle, jobs and investments that on the long term could be made by companies based on the PhD results. the strategic character of the research should not be merely a function of a single enterprise, should go beyond the horizon of a single enterprise, beyond the R&D horizon. It's possible, though, to mention a number of socio-economic benefits, and I'm referring to these several transition priorities, but economic should really be also in the proposal and the strategic research as well. Then step 5 is the preparation of the pre-selection meeting. So in principle, it's first prepared by us, by FWO staff. We are making the averages of the 3 internal evaluation reports and make up a provisional ranking. We are checking how consistent, how divergent the individual scores and assessments are, and certainly there where there is inconsistency, where there is divergence, we are listing them as to be discussed during the pre-selection meeting. We also keeping track of other issues that may arise as parallel funding or out-of-scope applications. So then you will receive, as a preparation, you will receive a briefing email by us where we give you the statistics and we indicate the proposals, the candidates where we at least think that they should be discussed a little more in depth during the pre-selection meeting. We also inform you about the meeting scenario, the procedure in an online format to allow efficient discussions. Then it's up to you to prepare the pre-selection meeting and try to substantiate your own internal evaluation reports. You're also free, of course, to suggest proposals that, according to you, should also be put under discussion. So where you do not agree, for instance, with 2 other internal reports. We also advise you to check all applications in your panel. Although you need to report on just a fraction of them, you can find them in the e-portal under My Panels. There you also find the other internal evaluation reports. So mind that the discussion on all applications is open to all panel members. The next slide. So the very pre-selection meeting. So we show everything on a scoreboard. What we have at hand is the application, is the score grid, 3 internal evaluation reports, and the average internal evaluation score for each criterion as a start for the discussion. So during the evaluation, the pre-selection meeting, of course, the aim of the discussion is to see whether we need to fine-tune that average as a starting point. Important to say that it's not worthwhile to change individual scores anymore. They, in fact, do not longer play a role, because once we are in a meeting, it's the full consensus scores that we're talking about. The average scores as a start to the discussion and to amending, discussing, adjusting of these scores. So we will end up then with the final and full panel decision on the final pre-selection, and to draw a line, so to speak, in between the people we like to see in an interview and the people, unfortunately, that we have to leave in this phase of the process, of the selection process. Then Inge will talk on the preparing the feedback, the pre-selection.
Yes, thank you, Dirk. So indeed, after the pre-selection, we will ask you to write the feedback. So who is writing the feedback? As we already indicated before, one of the 3 internal reviewers is designated as rapporteur and will be asked to edit the evaluation report in our feedback tool. So for which applications? After the pre-selection, the feedback report should be submitted only for those candidates who are not invited to the interview. So for candidates who are invited to the interview, you can already start adjusting the feedback report according to the overall panel scores, but this report should not be submitted yet at this stage. So this needs to be submitted only after the interviews took place, and also edited after the interviews took place. Next slide, please. So for the feedback report, we ask you to focus on strengths, also the weaknesses for all the three criteria: candidate, project, and application potential. And we also ask you to add some suggestions for improvement. These are always highly appreciated by candidates, especially when their application is not being retained. So what's important in the feedback, what's important here is that the feedback should not solely reflect your own opinion, but it should take into account all relevant remarks made by the other panel members. As such, we expect your comments to substantiate the overall final consensus scores, the panel scores. And for writing up the feedback, we also advise you to follow the descriptors as mentioned in the score grid, and also to avoid copying too much information already given by the candidate in his application, such as study results or percentiles, as this might be perceived of little added value for the candidate himself or herself. And next slide, please. So after the pre-selection comes the interview, during which you have the possibility to interact with the candidate. And some days before the interview, you will get an email from us with instructions to help you to prepare the meeting and make it as efficient as possible. I will go quickly through this slide. As you see, we have the three same criteria: candidate, project, and application potential. For the scoring in the meeting, Dirk will come back later, but we keep the same weight percentages: 60 for the candidate, 20 for the project, 20 for the application potential. And what's important here is that the interview itself should focus on the candidate, for which we added some extra new criteria in the scoring grid. So it's a different scoring grid here as used for the pre-selection. For the project and application potential, we keep the same scoring criteria. So whereas in the pre-selection, your evaluation was mainly based on study results and motivation, for the interview, we ask you, and Dirk already mentioned this, we asked you to evaluate the potential of the candidate to become an independent researcher. And also, and this is specifically for our SB fellows, we ask you to evaluate their potential as an innovative-oriented researcher. Of course, during the interview, you can always ask questions related to the project or the application potential as described in the project, always using, of course, the scoring grid as a guideline. Next slide, please. So this slide shows the course of the interview meeting itself. So first, the candidate is asked to give a short presentation as elevator pitch. This gives the opportunity to the candidate to introduce himself and the project, and may add some, and we also invite the candidates to add some additional achievements since the time of submission, such as information on the master thesis or some preliminary data updates so far, or if applicable, some COVID-related issues and their impact on the project or the application. The pitch is then followed by an interactive Q&A discussion. All panel members can participate here, but typically the three internal reviewers take the lead. The purpose of the Q&A discussion is to thoroughly challenge the candidate, going progressively from an easygoing discussion to a more gently provoking Q&A interaction. Also, please note here that this is the final step in the selection process, so it should allow you to discriminate between the different candidates. Also, to test the critical mindset, some unexpected non-specific questions can be asked. However, overall, we ask you to treat all candidates fair and equally by taking into account their probable stress level. So now Dirk will provide you some more details on the scoring for the interview.
Yes, okay. So we will use the same scoreboard, and you will be able to check what were the scores during the pre-selection. But still, for the candidate, because it's also different criteria we're looking at, we start from scratch, not totally, but we will attribute new scores. But for the project and the application potential, we merely only need to adjust if relevant, so if new elements are revealed from the very presentation or from the answers the candidate has been given to specific questions. So there's still some fine-tuning possible. So the material we have here is the application, the pitch and the answering of the question of the candidate, the scoring grid, which allows us to, with a resolution of a quarter of a point, to attribute the scores for each candidate after, of course, he or she has left the virtual meeting room. So again, it's good to stress that we focus the evaluation of the candidate to the competence. So we have the paper application, mainly the track record and the CV is presented. Now we look, okay, together with the CV, because implicitly we are still taking into account the findings of the pre-selection, of course, but now it's here to see the full picture and to see, okay, is it good that FWO would hire that candidate as an FWO PhD fellow. So also it's important during the interview to look a little bit through the actual performance. The performance, of course, is important and helps, but we are assessing the content and what the candidate says and what the candidate is presenting. Is she able to explain a very difficult topic, for instance, in a transparent way? That's important, and enthusiasm is good, but also the less convincing performance should be looked through and looking at what is actually said and how questions are being answered. So at the end of the session, it's time to fine-tune some scores and make up the final ranking, and this will lead for each candidate to assigning of a status. So in each panel we have a quota available. That's the number of candidates that can be directly approved, can be directly decided by the panel to obtain a grant. And that's of course the best ranked total scores so far, as the candidate is above a certain threshold for application for project and candidate, and score 2 for the application potential. Of course, it's possible that we have more than good candidates, more than the panel quota. So the remaining candidates that are ranked lower will receive a so-called wild card. They will still have a secondary possibility to get the grant after all. So these are remaining candidates that also come above these thresholds for the criteria, or other candidates, for instance, very good candidate, but a little bit below the threshold for project. And still there are some candidates that appear not to be good enough, even though we had a good impression of them during the pre-selection. And when we see them, when we hear them, when we know more details about the project, they are not good enough and are rejected. So we enter the panel session with a number of approved candidates and a number of wildcards. What happens with these wildcards? So they're a kind of a quality label. As I said, they have 4 as main score, which is good enough with no serious flaws in as a candidate or as a project. They deserve funding, but of course we do not have enough budget to fund them all. So we are still having that 10% of available fellowships not distributed yet through the panel quota. And then we will rank all these wildcards over 24 panels, and we are able to spend the 20 remaining grants of the 195 over the best ranked of these wildcard candidates. Therefore, we also will standardize their total scores. So and then the remaining wildcards are ranked in a reserve list. So in case selected candidates would withdraw early after the granting decisions, they can still be picked up. Also, universities may use that reserve list to grant some bridging or specific fellowships, or to give some co-funding through co-hosting institutes. Then the final step in the process is the feedback. This are the same principles. You have already some text based on the pre-selection, but please do mind that candidates are also very eager to know your your reaction to their very interview performance. So please add some evaluation, some assessment on the very interview as well, to complement the pre-selection evaluation and feedback. And there the deadline again is to submit your feedback 2 weeks after the panel meeting, so that we can send them directly after the decision of the Board of Trustees. Then very shortly on that little extra task on the activity report. So after 4 years, the PhD fellows have to submit the final report. They also report to us after 2 years. That's in the renewal procedure to have the second term of 2 years, but that's mainly an internal process where we do not involve the panel members, but mainly the promoters of the fellows. The evaluation of the activity reports, the final activity reports, are focusing, is the PhD already obtained, or is it at least planned or in sight? It's a written procedure. We put all the activity reports available on the extranet, and it's mainly FWO staff who will have a first look at it and offer you some pre-written consensus proposal on whether we accept it or make some adjustments. So you do not need to write full evaluation reports here, just to confirm or to adjust our comments and our scores being acceptable with comments or not acceptable. So that's concerns me. Then some final conclusion now by Hans.
Yeah, thank you, Dirk. So this brings us actually to the end of this webinar. We would like to thank you for your attention. As been said at the beginning of this webinar, you can consult on our website all the detailed information that we have prepared for this call and for this evaluation process. Of course, also the recording of this webinar can be consulted over and over again on our website, as is the PowerPoint that we have made use of this morning. So for now, I would like to thank you. I would like to thank our panelists, Steven, Inge, and Dirk, for preparing this info session for us. And we hope all to see you back again for the pre-selection meetings coming on soon the following months. Thank you very much.